It has been 777 days since I released my last YouTube video, but here we are, March 17th, 2024, with my brand new series. Welcome to the T206 Polar Bear Chronicles. But all I know is this, we have 10 days left of this magnificent card art set. Yes, this was a beast from the beginning. When I released a video at the beginning of 2021, I called this set the modern day monster, and this is what this set has become. So let's say I was a little optimistic of where Project 70 would stand in the hobby in 2024 when I mentioned that in 2021. Project 70 by no means is the modern day monster, even though it is a massive set with 750 plus cards. So many different ways to collect it. It right now is nowhere near the history or the collectability of the T206 set. Now maybe in 20 to 30 years it's a very different story. And before we dive too deep into T206, I'm sure you notice as well, my arm is very different than it was 2 years ago. I'm a little grayer than I was back then. But I just want to say thank you to everyone who followed, watched along in those times. Project 70, Project 2020 were a special time for me. Those cards hold a special place in my heart, and I just wanted to say thank you to everyone who interacted with me back in those days around those cards. So as we shift the focus now to 2024, and what is the goal, what is the intention around my new series called the T206 Polar Bear Chronicles, in my mind, it is twofold. Number one, I want to demystify the T206 set for modern day collectors. For a lot of people out there, this is a very intimidating set, but I will tell you, after I stopped collecting Project 2020 and Project 70, I put together the entire 250 card Polar Bear back run set for T206. Now, the T206 set in its whole entirety is 520 cards, 524 when you factor in the big four. We'll touch on those here in a couple of episodes in the future, but this series is specifically targeted around Polar Bear and collecting Polar Bear cards in the T206 set. And then number two, I almost think it's the most important part of the series. I want to humanize these players that are on the picture cards. For so many of us, these individuals are just that. They are baseball players on a card. But a lot of these players lived in modern times. They dealt with the same struggles we did. So I want to really bring these players to life, and we're going to talk about every single one of them that is included in the Polar Bear subset in this series. But before we do all of that, let's humanize my left arm. I will walk you through the process. I will walk you through the why behind every single player on my card as a way to understand what this sort of sleeve around Polar Bear means to me as a collector of this set. But a special shout out first to Stephanie, who was the tattoo artist behind all of this. On Instagram, her handle is @NatureNox, NatureNox. Give her a follow. Check out her artwork. She's an incredible artist, and if you're in the area, I highly recommend you book an appointment with her for your next tattoo. But if you're not into tattoos, I really hope you like the description and the artwork that is here, because these cards all hold a special place in my collecting journey around T206. So the original goal of my arm when I first reached out to Stephanie was to have her design and we showcase what I thought were the 5 most important cards to my set, sort of as also as a way to commemorate me completing this set in modern times, 110 years after it was basically first released. But as we worked through the process and we worked on the placement of the cards, I ended up with 10 different cards on my arm. So we doubled the amount of cards through proper placement. Also, there is an 11th card, but it is more of an Easter egg. I'll explain that at the very end. And in total, there are 3 Easter eggs on my arm that really talk about my collecting journey with T206 over the past couple of years. But the first move on my arm was on the upper arm. That, of course, was getting the proper placement of the Polar Bear back of the card. I think that is, to me, when you think about all of T206, the polar bear back to me is the best. The dark blue stands out immediately when you line it up against all of the 16 backs. It is so unique. I love the ad slogan. Everything about polar bear to me is amazing, and so I wanted to start with the card back. You will also notice the polar bear. Where did that polar bear come from? That polar bear came from the tobacco tin that the tobacco pouches were sold in back in the early 1900s. But you will see on the 10, the polar bear is holding the actual tobacco pouch. I didn't necessarily want that. I took elements of that onto my arm, but I had Stephanie overlay the card back with the polar bear. So that was the very first move on my journey last year around this sleeve. Next came what I will say are the 3 most important cards of the set when you think about all 250. You have Frank Chance, you've got Ray Dimmitt, and you've got Bill O'Hara. So why those 3 players? Number 1, Frank Chance, polar bear. That was my very first ever polar bear pickup from John Goodman at the 2019 National. And that is why Frank Chance is right here on my arm, front and center. Number 2 and number 3, you cannot talk about polar bear cards without Ray Dimmitt and Bill O'Hara. These are some of the most sought after cards in all of the Monster because the only way that they're released in a St. Louis variation is with a polar bear back. This was done to sell cards as an advertising gimmick back when they got traded to the St. Louis teams back in the day. But these are the 2 most expensive cards in the set, Ray Dimmitt and Bill O'Hara. So after those 3, the next 2 cards that came was Christy Mathewson, which is right here on my arm, and then on the very back you have Del Howard. 2 players with complete opposite careers, one in the Hall of Fame, one a lot of people have never ever heard about, but they both hold a special place in my collecting journey for T206. On Mathewson specifically, he was the very first player that I owned a card of the first ever Hall of Fame class. So I thought that was a great way to commemorate my collecting journey when it comes to the Big 5. The second one here is Del Howard. This was a special connection for me, and it's also why I want to dig deeper into these players for you as a collector of T206. As I was researching Del Howard, something stood out to me immediately. He died on his 79th birthday here in Seattle, which means he was buried here in Seattle. I was able last year to take his card to his gravesite. That was a special moment to actually really humanize this player. Unfortunately, obviously he has passed away, but to walk up to his gravesite, put his card next to him was a special moment in my collecting career and collecting journey and learning more about these players. So from there, now it gets fun. Those were the original 5 cards that I wanted to have on my arm, but through proper design, I was able to add on another 5. And so due to the placement of O'Hara and Dimmitt and Frank Chance, I had these spaces on my arm that weren't full pieces, but we could do individual pieces. So number 1 on the inner wrist, there's no better card in my opinion in the T206 set than the Hal Chase trophy card. The origins of the trophy are mainly known for this day and age, but at the end of the day, when I complete a set, I feel like I got a trophy. So for me, it was the perfect card to have on my inner wrist in that small piece. On the top of the forearm, Ty Cobb Red Portrait. This ended up for me being the very last card I picked up in December of 2023 to complete my set. So this was kind of a happy accident, but I loved the red background. That was also the very first way that I collected polar bear cards, was strictly the red portrait backgrounds. I think the red is phenomenal. Then on the inner part of the arm, I had this really interesting space between the Del Howard and the Ray Dimmitt, and so I loved the Howie Kamnitz card with the colorful jersey, the red and blue stripes. So you will not see his face on the card, but for any collector of T206, you have Howie Kamnitz there in the middle. And then I love the building on the Bill Clancy card, and so it looks like a little bit of a modern house or a stadium that's depicted on the card, but I just really liked it, so it kind of fit there perfectly right there on the top. You will also notice right above the Bill Clancy, the Lerman and Welburn, the wording right there, that is the actual wording from the tobacco pouch that the polar bear cards were sold in. Kind of a neat little nod to the pouch itself without having the whole pouch on my arm. Now, moving to the upper shoulder here, you will notice that there's the capstone here at the very top. That capstone is from the actual Tobacco 10. So I found ways to incorporate the Tobacco 10 with the polar bear and now the capstone in with the design, because you can't have polar bear tobacco without that 10 itself. And now through all of this, it has left me with 2 blank spaces at the very top to complete this project. And so I went back and forth on what 2 cards to put on my arm. I thought about John Titus, the only player in the entire set that has a mustache or any kind of facial hair, but I realized that's not really important to me as a collector, and I'm going to wear these cards for the rest of my life. And so I went back and forth and I realized, duh, the 2 cards I should put up there are the very first cards I ever purchased around T206. Now, these were purchased in non-polar bear form, but on the left you have Solly Hoffman, and on the right you have Harry Hinchman. Now, if you're in tune with T206, you will know that it's pretty well decided in modern times that the player depicted on Harry Hinchman's card is Bud Sharp, and the actual Harry Hinchman is actually on the Bud Sharp card. But for my tattoo, we have Harry Hinchman because that is the very first card I picked up when I started collecting T206 back in 2019. Now comes the fun part, the 3 Easter eggs in my tattoo. Starting with the biggest one and then going to the smallest one. So you'll notice on my arm it goes orange, yellow to the blue and yellow at the very top. If you take a look at the Ty Cobb bat off shoulder, that is the sunset from that card. We overlaid the background with all the blank spaces, and so that is the bat off shoulder sunset in the card. The second one is very obvious, but in 2019, the National was in Chicago, and the original reason I bought these T206 cards was to commemorate my first ever National. So having Chicago right here with Frank Chance, to me, is the second Easter egg, and it talks about where this journey began. And then the smallest one is here on the inner arm, that little red triangle. I said it earlier in the episode, when I first started collecting T206 cards, I was collecting specifically cards with red backgrounds. And so that's a quick nod to my original journey when it comes to T206. And if you think I'm done, I'm not. Well, I'm done with this arm. There's really nowhere else to go. I don't feel like putting a card up here in the upper arm with the armpit. I don't think that's respectful of the player. But on May 4th, Stephanie and I are going to start the right arm. This is going to be a tribute and a nod not only to tobacco products, the leaf, but the packages that these tobacco cards were sold in. So think of the amazing design of the Old Mill package. Think about the drum cigarette package. There's going to be different packages used throughout this design, and so we start that on May 4th, and you'll be able to walk through that journey with me over the next year as we complete this project on the right arm. But in the meantime, before May 4th, do me a huge favor. If you're new around here, hit that subscribe button so you are notified the moment I put up my next video around the T206 Polar Bear set. My goal this year is to demystify the set and also humanize the players that are depicted on the card. And I really do hope you enjoyed the walkthrough of my tattoo, and now you have a deep understanding of what this tattoo means to me as a collector around T206. Until the next video, have a great day, and thanks for watching.